Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and in this week's video I want to talk about intuitive paganism and intuitive approaches to deity work. Attention! It's Patron shoutout time! Thank you really much, as always, to the Lunar Botanist, Soren, Braden, Diego, Bethany, Hannah, Tel, Timothy, Bjorn, Scylla, Ash, Lucy, and Joss. And now, let's talk. I got the idea to make this video actually when I filmed the last Let's Talk video about my personal struggles with imposter syndrome, because I realized that most of my personal issues with imposter syndrome when it comes to Norse paganism or heathenry comes from the fact that I am not a Reconstructionist pagan. For all of those who don't know what a Reconstructionist pagan versus a more intuitive or an eclectic pagan, there are a lot of terms for that, but for all of those who don't know what a Reconstructionist pagan is, a Reconstructionist pagan is a pagan, who tries to reconstruct the original practice as best as possible from historical research. So from the historical evidence that we have, maybe archaeological finds or the original sources that we have, they try to do as much research as possible to get as closest to the original practice as they can. And I am personally definitely not a Reconstructionist pagan. I do my research, yes, I read the original sources, yes, I am a little bit of a history and archaeology nerd, just privately, just basically because I love learning about the history of pre-Christian Scandinavia, but I don't hold myself to the standard that I have to, have a practice, a pagan practice that is as close as possible to the original practice. That's just something that doesn't really work for me. I'm just, in general, an extremely intuitive person. Also, a lot of my witchcraft practice is just extremely intuitive. I just intuitively feel what I want to do, what I have to do, or how I can connect to the gods. And those ways that I feel intuitively will work. They aren't always the ways that would originally have been practiced. Because, I mean, for example, I connect to the gods by using my tarot cards. And, well, in pre-Christian Scandinavia, no one had tarot cards because I think they didn't exist yet back then. So, it's, for example, something that I do that has nothing to do with historical evidence. I just don't like to limit myself when it comes to the ways that I connect to the gods. Because I feel like it is my personal spirituality. It is my personal connection to the gods, so I feel like it should be intuitive. If that's possible for me, why not do it intuitively? But I feel like most Norse paganism or heathenry that is represented online is Reconstructionist paganism. And I feel like while I love learning from Reconstructionist pagans, I really do, some of my most favorite creators, for example, Ocean Keltoy, is a Reconstructionist pagan. And I love his videos. If you don't know him yet, check him out. But I feel like the fact that most Norse pagans online that are like content creators are Reconstructionist or more on the Reconstructionist side can create a problem for people like me who practice more intuitively or more eclectically, because there are also some people who mix Norse practices with completely different things. And yeah, that can just make some people feel like their practice isn't the way that it should be. Maybe their practice isn't valid, their approaches to connecting to the gods aren't valid, and they should be doing it differently. They should do more research, or they should try to get more closely to the original practice. I think a great issue, for example, for me, especially in the beginning when I started out, was that I kind of felt like I had to read 5 million books first so that I know everything there is about Norse paganism and about archaeology and about the history of pre-Christian Scandinavia. I felt like I had to know everything before I could even start. And that's just not true. And yeah, this thought that maybe a lot of other people may feel the same way as I do about this just makes me kind of sad, because I want everyone to be happy in their pagan practice. So yeah, what's the goal of this video? I guess the goal of this video is just to make sure that people know that there are different ways of practicing paganism, and to make sure that if you are a more intuitive pagan or someone who doesn't consider themselves to be a Reconstructionist pagan, and if you are maybe struggling with that because you feel like your practice isn't good enough because of that's not true. There are a lot of us, I feel like, that especially people who start out with witchcraft and then come to Norse paganism from their witchcraft practice, I feel like that especially these people are mostly not Reconstructionists. And I feel like there are a lot nowadays, because a lot of people... I touched the microphone, I'm sorry if that was loud. Yeah, I feel like that there are a lot of people like that. I'm one of those people. And I feel like, yeah, there are probably a lot of us, and especially because there are a lot of new Norse pagans and heathens, because for some reason it gains popularity, which I love. But yeah, there are a lot of us. We are fine, we are valid, our ways of connecting with the gods are valid, because it's our personal way of connecting with the gods. So how can it be wrong if it works for us? But yeah, I really want to make sure that this video doesn't come off as me bashing Reconstructionists, because, as I said, I have a whole lot of respect for Reconstructionists, because I feel like it's a whole lot of work. It always seems to me to be very hard, because you have to, yeah, just do a lot of research and just read a lot of intellectual books and papers and stuff. So it's definitely not the easiest way, I think. And yeah, as I said, I have a lot of respect for Reconstructionist pagans. Some of my biggest inspirations and the biggest sources that I love to learn online from are Reconstructionist pagans. So I definitely don't want to bash anyone. I just want to make sure that more intuitive and eclectic pagans feel like their practice is valid. But I know that there are definitely also people out there who say that Reconstructionist paganism is the only way, which I can only respond to with what? Because while yes, it's an ancient religion, and yes, you should definitely do your research, because if you practice in a way that has nothing to do with the original practice, then how is it Norse paganism? How is it heathenry? But if you think about it, like even back then, if you think about the regions where Norse paganism was practiced, if you think about pre-Christian Scandinavia, for example, if you think about the Germanic regions, that is such a big region. So you better not think that there was one practice that everyone followed and everyone practiced exactly the same way. I mean, those were completely separate tribes who, yeah, maybe they had contact with each other, but they definitely didn't have like this one practice that everyone followed and everyone did it the same way. Definitely not. There were definitely different types of practices in different areas and regions, depending on the culture, depending on the language probably, depending on a lot of stuff. And I mean, it's a religion. It changes over time. It's normal that religion changes over time. So while I think it's important to kind of anchor our practice in the original practice, or at least what we think of would be the original practice, I think it's normal that religion and the practice of this religion changes over time. So if you think about it, I mean, we are like 1,000 years later than this religion was originally practiced. We are practicing off of a very, very limited amount of sources and historical evidence. So wow, 1,000 years later, it's completely normal that the way that we practice today is different than the way it was originally practiced. That's just normal. So I think personally, it's completely okay to bring in your own intuitive approaches or even practices from somewhere else, as long as you are respectful in that. I think it's completely okay to bring in new things into this religion, into your practice. And then also, if you think about it, we don't know how Norse paganism has been practiced originally. We just don't have enough resources. We don't have enough historical evidence. So how can we reconstruct it 100% accurately? We can't. So there's also always gaps that we have to kind of fill in. And we can do that in a lot of different ways, but we have to fill in these gaps. So there's always a little bit of more intuitive approaches or eclectic approaches, because we have to fill in the gaps somehow, the gaps that we don't know how they were practiced back then. So a completely reconstructionist approach isn't even possible, in my personal opinion. And then also, the ways that we are trying to reconstruct nowadays, they have to be made up at some point. At some point, someone has to have thought like intuitively, okay, I will do this to connect with the gods. At some point, there has to have been the first one who has kind of made something up or felt something intuitively that they should do, that then other people adopted because it worked. Basically, what we're trying to reconstruct nowadays has been an intuitive or eclectic approach back then. So yeah, in my opinion, if a reconstructionist says that it's the only way to practice, that's just not true. That just logically doesn't make sense to me. And yes, I will say it again. I think it's very important to anchor our practice in the historical evidence and in the sources that we have, but it's completely fine to find out new ways, intuitively or eclectively, that we can connect to the gods. One thing that I also find really, really interesting is how much UPG, so unverified personal gnosis, so experiences that we have made ourselves that are not anchored in any resources at all, how much UPG becomes SPG, so shared personal gnosis. For example, my feelings about the goddess Hel. They are a lot different than she's portrayed in the sources. She's always portrayed more like, I don't know, scary and dark, but she feels extremely motherly to me. And I think it's extremely interesting because I said that in my video about Hel, and there were so many people who approached me in the comments or via Instagram, for example, who told me that they also feel that way about Hel, that Hel is very motherly and very nurturing and that she just likes to help people. So yeah, I just kind of hope that this maybe makes you more comfortable in adopting more intuitive approaches into your pagan practice or your deity work. Even if you're not a Norse pagan, doesn't have to do with only Norse paganism, also works for just normal deity work. And I think I will personally try to get rid of my own imposter syndrome when it comes to Norse paganism and heathenry now by just straight up calling myself an intuitive Norse pagan. I will just call myself that. I will just create this label, I'm an intuitive Norse pagan. While I do love researching and learning about the historical evidence that we have, the sources, whatever, I just really enjoy making my own experiences that aren't anchored in any evidence. I love intuitively finding ways to connect with the gods. I love doing that. It is completely fine to do that. My most powerful experiences have been extremely intuitive. They weren't in like any rituals that someone wrote at some point and said this is how it was done back then. It was when I, for example, went on a really intuitive walk with and for Hel, and she just guided me to plants that she's apparently connected with. For example, the yew tree or ivy. And when I did research, then afterwards, I found out that apparently that is true. But one thing that I also want to say in this video, while I think it's really cool and really important to make your own experiences and find out your own UPG, I find it extremely important to be honest with yourself, because if you have this intuitive approach and you make your own experiences and you work with your own UPG, it is very, very, very easy to kind of make things up. While it's cool making your own experiences, if you only make stuff up, that also doesn't make sense. So I think it's very, very important to be very honest with yourself and to just constantly question yourself whether what you're experiencing is real or if it's maybe just made up, because there is a higher chance to make things up if you have an intuitive approach to paganism or deity work than if you are a Reconstructionist, because there's just more space, I would say, to make things up. And now I just want to give you some tips, maybe, if you want to become more intuitive in your own practice. I think it's very difficult to give you any tips on that, but I still want to try because I feel like it's such a huge part of my practice that I just want to share it with other people who maybe have a more difficult time to do that, because I'm aware that it is not really that common to be extremely intuitive. There are a lot of people who don't really have that much of an access to their own intuition. They struggle with kind of listening to their intuition and even just finding out how their intuition kind of manifests. So I think the first tip that I would give you is to find out how your intuition tells you things. So for example, for me, it's really physical. When my intuition tells me something is right, I feel it, for example, in my solar plexus area and in my heart, and in my heart area. So around here, I feel it physically through a warm feeling and a tingling feeling. That is how my personal intuition tells me that something is right. So if I want to, for example, connect to a deity and I want to feel if they are there or if maybe their answer is a positive one, I don't know. If I want to kind of feel intuitively what happens, I will see whether this physical feeling comes up in this area, and if yes, then it's a yes. But I'm aware that that's not as easy for other people and it can manifest in different ways. So not everyone is as physical as I am with their intuition, or it can just manifest in different ways. Some people get goosebumps, for example, if their intuition kicks in, or I don't know, you could feel it in so many different ways. It's very difficult to explain. You could also see something. I guess you could connect to your intuition with every sense, I guess. And a big thing is to just know, intuitively knowing things. It's also something that works for me pretty well, but I think that is very difficult to find out if it's actually your intuition or yourself making something up, if you just know it. You just have to practice it. That's the thing. One thing I personally like to do to kind of find out if my intuition works is, for example, I'm a big crystal person. I love crystals. So I would go into a crystal shop and then just feel into myself and try to feel where I'm being pulled towards. So, for example, if I go into a crystal shop and I have the crystal shop in front of me, I would try to feel into myself and just connect with my senses and then see where I'm being pulled to, or just what just jumps at me. You know what I mean? If there's one specific crystal that just seems to kind of pull me towards it, then that would be a sign that my intuition is telling me that that crystal is probably something that I should connect with. That is something that works really well for me. So if you want to kind of learn how to feel your intuition, maybe try doing that. Or you could do the same thing maybe if you go on a walk. You could ask yourself maybe, I don't know, where is a tree that I should connect to, or something like that. And then just listen to your body and your senses and see whether something comes up. If you're being pulled towards a specific tree, if you're hearing something, if you're feeling something, if you just know it, just see what comes up and then do it regularly. And as soon as you know how what your intuition feels like, or how it manifests, how it's kind of talks to you, as soon as you do that, it will be so much easier to connect to the gods in an intuitive way. One other thing that I feel like really helps with your intuition is meditating. because you kind of develop a differentiation between what your mind tells you and what you feel. Because when you meditate and you try to be silent and still, you just realize how many random thoughts just pop up. Yeah, you just get a little bit of distance from your mind telling you things. So it's just easier to listen to your body and to your senses. So if you're unsure about a situation or an experience or something like that, maybe just try to meditate on it and just see what comes up. And then, as soon as it comes up, try to remember what it felt like or where it came up. Like, did it come up via goosebumps? Did it come up with a physical feeling in a specific body part? Whatever. Just try to remember that, so that as soon as you have the same feeling again, you know that it's your intuition talking. And I think a really good challenge for someone who wants to try to get more intuitive and try to make their own experiences more with deities would be to maybe try to connect to a deity that you know basically nothing on. So, for example, the first deity that comes to mind for me is the goddess Eir. We don't really have that much information on her, so you can't really properly reconstruct that much around her because we don't know a lot. So that would be, for example, a deity with which you could, or you have to connect really intuitively, and with who you have to make your own experiences, because there is not much else to know. And then maybe try to connect with other people who practice with the same deity, and then see whether your experiences are aligning. Maybe they will probably be different, but maybe they align at some points. And I think that could maybe be a way that you could just practice. And yeah, I guess that is everything that I have for you today. That is everything that I wanted to talk about. You know, these Let's Talk videos are just rambly videos because I feel like I have to, or I want to talk about a topic, I want to address something. So they're mostly not like filled to the brim with information. They're just more sit down and talky videos, but I really like doing them, especially if I just feel like I have to get something off my chest. And especially if I want to make other people feel better about their practice. So I hope I was able to do that. I hope maybe now you feel a little bit more valid in your practice, because you definitely are, no matter how you practice. No matter if you're a Reconstructionist pagan or have a more intuitive or eclectic approach, your experiences are valid, your practice is valid. Don't you worry. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. And maybe follow me on Instagram, or check out my online shop, or maybe even consider becoming my patron. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!